When we think about how we perceive the world, we usually picture our eyes as these perfect objective windows.
Right. Like high-definition cameras.
Exactly. Like high-definition cameras just strapped to our heads. You just point the lens, you hit record, and, well, there it is. Unvarnished reality, completely unfiltered for you to just consume.
It is, it's an incredibly comforting illusion, I think. We really assume we get this direct download of the universe straight into the visual cortex.
Yeah.
Because, if we see it, it must be true. We trust our own sensory input implicitly.
We really do. But then, you start looking at the actual mechanics of how we communicate what we see.
Yeah.
You look at how we actually process the media around us, and suddenly those clean, objective camera lenses start to look, well, a lot more like funhouse mirrors.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, every surface is like slightly curved, slightly distorted by the very words we use to describe it, because language doesn't just passively describe our reality.
No, it actively builds it.
Yes, it actively builds the architecture of our perception. And if you don't have the specific vocabulary to identify how a piece of information is manipulating you, you are essentially walking through that digital funhouse completely blindfolded.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It is. So today, for you listening, we are taking the blindfold off. We're going to unpack the exact vocabulary of truth, lies, and human perception.
From the absolute basics.
Right, starting from the basic physical act of looking at a screen, all the way up to the systemic manipulation of modern media.
Because understanding this isn't just, an academic exercise in linguistics.
No, not at all.
It is a fundamental survival guide for navigating today's information ecosystem. We are currently bombarded with more data in a single afternoon than our ancestors processed in an entire lifetime.
That is just wild to think about, a single afternoon.
Yeah. And if we don't understand the subtle differences in the words we use to categorize media, we inevitably fall victim to the very mechanisms designed to exploit our attention.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the absolute ground floor, the bedrock of how we interface with reality.
The physical verbs.
Right. And surprisingly, this begins with a massive, highly specific trap regarding how the English language forces us to use our eyes. We have 3 distinct verbs of sight that dictate our relationship with information.
Watch, look at, and see.
Exactly. Watch, look at, and see.
And what's fascinating here is that the way English categorizes our physical visual interaction with reality is based entirely on the physics of movement and time.
Wait, really? The physics of it?
Yeah. In many other languages, you might use the exact same verb to describe your interaction with the static photograph printed on paper and a dynamic movie playing on a screen.
Oh, I see. So the biological action of using your eyes is just treated as a universal constant in those languages.
Precisely. But English demands that you recognize the kinetic state of the object you're observing. It forces you to categorize the movement.
So movement is the absolute key to this.
It is.
If you are focusing your eyes on something that is moving or something that is changing over a period of time, you are locked into using the verb watch.
Right. You watch the evening news on television.
Or you watch a documentary on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
The object itself is dynamic, so your verb must reflect that active, continuous tracking.
Yeah. Watching implies a sustained duration of focus on something that possesses its own internal kinetic energy. The temporal flow is dictated by the object, not by you.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, contrast that cognitive state with look at.
Mm-hmm.
If you are focusing your eyes on something completely static, something frozen in time that does not move, you use look at.
Like you look at a newspaper?
Exactly. You look at a photograph or a printed document.
Because you'd never say, I watched the photograph.
Right. That sounds ridiculous.
And you never say, I looked at the movie. That completely breaks the physics of the language.
It does.
I like to think about it like studying a painting in a quiet museum versus standing on a sidewalk while a chaotic parade marches past you.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. When you're in the museum looking at a static painting, you are entirely in control of the pace. The object is still. You can let your eyes wander to the top left corner, linger there for 5 minutes, step back, step forward. You command the timeline.
You're in charge.
But when you're watching the parade, you have to actively track the movement. The parade is dictating the pace. If you look away, you miss the float. You are locked into the timeline of the moving object.
The museum versus the parade.
Right.
And that points to a fundamental shift in cognitive control. It highlights the difference between deliberate, self-paced decoding and the active, continuous tracking of dynamic information.
Well, the mental effort is different.
Entirely. When you look at a printed newspaper, your brain is doing the heavy lifting of converting static symbols into a narrative at your own speed. When you watch a video broadcast, the narrative is unfolding in real time, pulling your attention along a track that someone else built.
The cognitive load is completely different. Imagine waking up the day after a massive hurricane hits your coast. The power is out, the streets are flooded. One of your neighbors comes over and says they didn't watch the local TV broadcast that morning because their satellite was down, but they pulled out their phone and watched a chaotic video of the floodwaters rushing down Main Street.
They are tracking the violent movement of the water on a glowing screen.
Right. And then your other neighbor responds by pulling a damp physical newspaper out of a plastic bag, saying they are going to pick at the front page to read the casualty reports.
They are turning to a static, frozen representation of the exact same event.
Exactly. The linguistic distinction immediately tells you who was dragged along by the kinetic energy of the video and who sat in silence decoding static text.
But then there's the third verb, which throws a fascinating curveball into this whole physics-based system.
Ah, see?
Yes, see? The first neighbor asks, "Did you see the news about the big storm?"
Right. And see is generally used for a raw biological ability, like I can see a bird in the sky. But it also refers to attending a public event, like you go to the cinema to see a movie.
Exactly.
But the problem I have with this is the contradiction. I mean, if I am sitting in a theater visually tracking moving images on a screen, the physics rule says I should be watching it.
It does.
So is the linguistic shift implying that the social event of going out in public actually overrides the visual consumption of the media itself?
The locus of the action completely shifts.
F.
Yes.
Wow.
Historically and linguistically, seeing a film in a theater moves the focus from the illuminated screen to the shared physical space. When you say, "I watched a movie on my phone," the action is entirely closed off. The circuit is just between your retinas and the digital device.
It's totally oscillated.
Right, it's isolated.
What?
But "I am going to see a movie" suggests an excursion. It implies a biological presence in a shared environment. You are placing your physical body into a dark room alongside hundreds of other bodies reacting simultaneously to the same stimuli.
That is so true. You're laughing together, gasping together.
Exactly. The language recognizes that the group psychology and the social context of the consumption change the nature of the experience so deeply that you need an entirely different verb.
That is wild to think about. The context actually overrides the physics. It just proves how intricately our vocabulary maps our behavior.
It really does.
So we have this absolute foundational bedrock. We track dynamic things that move by watching them. We control the pace of static things by looking at them. And we use our raw vision to see events in the shared physical world.
But knowing how our eyes physically connect to a medium is just the starting point.
Right, because we aren't just passively letting the parade march by anymore.
We can't afford to be passive. The velocity of information has accelerated past the point where simple observation is enough. We have to actively hunt for data. We have to filter it, verify it, and organize it.
It's a full-time job.
It is. The language shifts from the mechanics of physical sight to the mechanics of active investigation.
And this introduces a specific set of dynamic phrasal verbs that describe how we discover and manage the sheer fire hose of modern news. The most immediate one is find out.
Ah, yes.
This is the moment of pure, unexpected discovery. It's when you uncover a brand new piece of information that you simply did not possess a microsecond before. For example, I just found out that the mayor is resigning.
It is a sudden, instantaneous acquisition of data. It implies a threshold has been crossed abruptly, ignorance turning instantly into awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Ignorance to awareness in a second.
But finding out is usually isolated. It's a single data point. The reality of our media diet is continuous and overwhelming, which is why we rely so heavily on the phrase, catch up on.
Catch up on. You use this when you've been busy. Maybe you intentionally unplugged, went on vacation to a cabin for a week, and now you return to civilization and need to get the latest updates.
I was off the grid all week, so I need to catch up on the global news.
Yeah, and honestly, just thinking about the phrase catch up on perfectly captures the sheer baseline anxiety of the 24/7 news cycle.
Oh, absolutely.
It creates this vivid, exhausting mental image of information as a high-speed runaway train. The train is constantly moving, it never stops at a station, and we are just these tired passengers sprinting alongside the tracks, constantly trying to jump on board.
That is a very stressful visual.
Right. We are always inherently behind. We are perpetually in a state of deficit, always trying to catch up.
And that anxiety is a defining feature of the modern human condition.
Mhm.
Because the generation of news no longer sleeps, our feeling of being deficit in our knowledge is permanent.
It never ends.
Prior to the internet and 24-hour cable news, there was a daily newspaper and an evening broadcast. There was an end to the news day. You could be fully caught up.
You could just read the paper and be done.
Exactly. Now, the tracks never end. But the real danger isn't just the speed of the train. It's what happens when the cargo on that train is poisoned.
Wow, okay. And the problem I run into with this constant need to sprint and catch up is that speed almost always kills accuracy. When everything is a breaking alert, my default setting isn't curiosity anymore. It's intense suspicion. When a story sounds fake or exaggerated, you can't just absorb it. You have to look into it. You investigate it.
Right.
Like, that headline sounds completely suspicious. I am going to look into it before I share it.
Notice the spatial metaphor inherent in looking into. You are no longer just looking at the flat surface of the text, as we discussed in the foundation.
Oh, right. Looking at versus looking into.
Yes. You are attempting to pierce the outer layer of the headline to examine the internal structural integrity of the claim. You are checking the primary sources, evaluating the motives of the author, cross-referencing the dates. It requires friction.
It requires a tremendous amount of cognitive effort.
It does.
And it is an effort we absolutely have to make because of the dark counterpart to looking into something. The reality that forces us to investigate in the first place is the phrase, make it up.
Yes, the fabrication.
To make it up means to invent a completely false story from thin air. To manufacture a lie with zero basis in reality. Don't panic over that article. The author completely made it up.
This creates a terrifying asymmetry in our information ecosystem. Think about the incredible painstaking effort inherent in looking into something versus the malicious, frictionless ease with which someone can make things up.
It's so unfair, honestly.
There's a concept in network theory often referred to as the bullshit asymmetry principle.
I love that name, the bullshit asymmetry principle.
It's very accurate. It essentially states that the amount of energy required to refute false information is an order of magnitude larger than the energy required to produce it.
That makes total sense. Let's ground this in a scenario. Imagine a vicious rumor starts circulating around a large corporate office that the company is secretly preparing to file for bankruptcy.
A nightmare scenario.
This total nightmare. The rumor hits the internal messaging system. People are instantly panicking. Their mortgages, their children's tuitions, their entire livelihoods are suddenly perceived to be on the line. The panic is visceral.
Yeah.
Now, one employee hears this terrifying rumor, but instead of just accepting it and updating their resume, they refuse to be a passive node in the network. They decide to look into it.
They apply their agency. They decide to introduce friction into a frictionless panic.
Exactly. And how do they actually do that? They have to spend their entire weekend catching up on the company's dense, highly technical quarterly financial reports. They have to parse through spreadsheets, cross-reference market trends, and do the exhausting, boring work of looking into the raw data.
Which takes hours, if not days.
Right. And after 48 hours of intense intellectual labor, what do they find out? They discover that an angry ex-employee who was fired the week before completely made it up just to scare people.
Pure fabrication.
The entire crisis was fabricated out of spite.
That scenario perfectly encapsulates the vulnerability of human communication networks. A single bad actor can inject a synthetic, made-up pathogen into the system with a single keystroke. It takes them 3 seconds to type the lie.
3 seconds.
But it requires immense, localized, time-consuming effort from individuals to look into it, verify the data, and cure the infection. Truth is not a default state in a digital network. It is a fragile construct that must be actively defended through rigorous, exhausting investigation.
It's exhausting just talking about it. I mean, we are constantly sprinting alongside the train to catch up on the news, constantly having to expend massive amounts of energy to look into suspicious claims, all to protect ourselves from people making things up.
It's burnout-inducing.
It really is. If it takes that much effort to debunk a single corporate rumor, we obviously can't possibly investigate every single piece of data we encounter in a day. We would be paralyzed.
Completely.
We need heuristics, we need shortcuts. How do we filter this automatically?
Well, we have to develop mental armor. We elevate from mechanical investigation to psychological filtering. We rely on deeply ingrained cultural idioms that act as societal defense mechanisms.
Idioms as defense mechanisms. I like that.
These phrases are the shorthand we use to describe healthy skepticism and to map exactly how rumors flow through a population before we even have the time to investigate them.
And the most vital piece of mental armor we have is the phrase, take it with a grain of salt.
A classic.
Right. If someone tells you a wild, highly improbable piece of news and you immediately suspect it might be heavily exaggerated, you take it with a grain of salt. You accept the information into your brain, but you maintain a thick barrier of skepticism.
Yes.
Like if a coworker who is notorious for constantly lying tells you they were getting a massive, unprecedented promotion to vice president tomorrow, you don't call them a liar to their face, but internally you say, I am taking that with a massive grain of salt. It's essentially installing a spam filter in your own brain.
The spam filter is a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanics of this idiom. Expand on how that operates operationally within the mind.
Hey, think about your email inbox. The spam filter does not violently delete the incoming email before you even know it exists. That would be dangerous, right? What if it's a false positive?
Exactly. You might miss something important.
Instead, it allows the data to arrive. The email sits there in your folder, you can see the subject line, but the filter flags it with a bright red warning label that says, "Caution, this sender is known for malicious content. Do not click the links."
Right.
When you take information with a grain of salt, you are allowing the words to enter your awareness, but your brain instantly flags the data for having low credibility. You are holding the data in a kind of mental quarantine until you have the time to look into it properly.
You're engaging in a rapid form of Bayesian updating.
Oh, Bayesian updating.
Yeah, you aren't rejecting the possibility of truth entirely, which would be dangerous closed-mindedness. But based on the prior probability of that coworker telling the truth, you are assigning the new claim a very low probability of accuracy. You're protecting your cognitive ecosystem from immediate infection.
It's a great defense.
And we desperately need that mental spam filter because of the terrifying velocity at which unverified information travels. Which brings us to the next vital idiom. Spread like wildfire. Spread like wildfire. We use this to describe the terrifying speed at which gossip, panic, and fake news move through a network. The completely fabricated rumor about the celebrity divorce spread like wildfire across social media. It paints an incredibly destructive, chaotic picture.
The metaphor of a wildfire is chillingly accurate for modern digital communication, particularly when we look at the physics of how a fire actually behaves.
Oh, how so?
Well, a wildfire is not just a large campfire. It is an uncontrolled ecological disaster that literally creates its own localized weather system.
Wait, really? It makes its own weather? Yes. The intense heat generates massive updrafts and erratic winds. These winds carry burning embers miles ahead of the main blaze, dropping them into dry brush and starting entirely new, disconnected fires spontaneously.
It bypasses the fire lines completely.
Precisely. When a piece of sensational fake news hits a social network, it behaves exactly like those airborne embers. The algorithm acts as the wind, and human emotion acts as the dry kindling.
Oh, wow.
The rumor doesn't travel in a straight logical line. It jumps from node to node, crossing geographic and demographic boundaries in seconds, entirely out of the control of the bad actor who originally sparked it.
It just takes on a life of its own.
Exactly. It bypasses our prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of the brain, and lands directly in the emotional centers. By the time someone tries to look into it and spray water on the flames, the landscape is already burned to ash.
It is a violent, chaotic metaphor for sharing information, but it maps perfectly to the reality of the internet. We can all picture the digital wildfire. But, the threat to our perception isn't always a screaming, chaotic blaze of fake news on social media.
No, sometimes it's very quiet.
Exactly. Sometimes the manipulation is incredibly quiet. It's dressed up in a $1,000 suit, sitting in a mahogany boardroom, speaking in very calm, polite, carefully vetted sentences. And surviving that environment requires the most advanced tool we have, the ability to read between the lines.
Yes. To read between the lines is the active acknowledgement that powerful people, vast institutions, and massive media networks rarely state their true intentions plainly.
They almost never do.
The surface text, the official statement, is almost always a carefully constructed, highly engineered facade designed to minimize liability and manipulate public perception.
Let's go back to our corporate scenario. Imagine the CEO stands up in front of the entire company, looks calmly into the camera, and announces that over the next quarter, the corporation will be undergoing a period of strategic restructuring.
Strategic restructuring.
Right. Now, on the surface, the word restructuring sounds incredibly neutral. It sounds productive. It sounds like someone is just rearranging the furniture in the office to improve the feng shui.
It sounds harmless.
But if you apply the skill of reading between the lines, you analyze the broader context. You look at the recent drop in quarterly profits, you look at the macroeconomic climate, and you understand the historical linguistic engineering of corporate PR.
Right.
You realize the hidden, unspoken meaning is that massive, brutal firings are imminent.
You are decoding the subtext. Reading between the lines is an act of real-time translation. You are translating frictionless public relations speak back into cold, hard, high-friction reality. The lines are the official statements, the actual ink on the page, or the words vibrating in the air.
Yeah.
But the truth doesn't live in the ink. The truth lives in the white space between those lines.
Yeah.
It lives specifically in what they are intentionally choosing not to say.
It's like listening to a complex piece of music, but instead of focusing on the notes being played, you focus entirely on the silence between the notes to understand the actual rhythm of the melody.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
You have to train your ear to hear the omissions. When you master these concepts, when you can automatically quarantine suspicious data with a grain of salt, when you recognize the destructive airborne velocity of a wildfire rumor, and when you can decode the hidden subtext of a CEO by reading between the lines, you have built a highly robust intellectual defense system.
You've become a proficient analyst of localized information. You can successfully navigate office gossip, decipher heavily vetted corporate memos, and survive your daily social media feeds with a necessary, healthy degree of skepticism.
But unfortunately, just understanding the mechanics of a rumor isn't enough to protect you anymore.
No, it's really not.
Because what happens when the hidden meanings we are trying so desperately to decode aren't just simple corporate PR? What happens when the manipulation isn't a single lie told by a disgruntled ex-employee, but a systemic, macroeconomic architecture designed to hack the very neurology of the human species?
The scale completely shifts.
It does. We have to leave the realm of localized grammar and office idioms behind. We are approaching the philosophical summit of modern media, the architecture of the modern media ecosystem.
And this is where the scale of the problem shifts from micro-interactions to global macroeconomics. In the past, the dominant paradigm of news, particularly broadcast and print journalism of the mid-20th century, at least aspired to be objective, factual, and frankly, quite boring.
Yeah, boring is a good word for it.
The news was treated largely as a public utility, much like the municipal water supply or the electrical grid. It was delivered dryly. But today, the media ecosystem does not run on the delivery of utility. It runs on highly specific, intentionally dangerous economic engines.
And the absolute primary engine driving this new architecture is sensationalism, right?
We define sensationalism as the deliberate use of shocking, wildly exaggerated language and imagery purely to provoke visceral excitement or public interest at the complete and utter expense of factual accuracy.
It is the act of taking a minor, localized spark and intentionally describing it as a global nuclear explosion just to force people to turn their heads.
Exactly. And sensationalism has evolved a very specific, highly optimized digital manifestation, which we call clickbait.
Clickbait, we all know it.
We all fall for it. Clickbait consists of headlines and thumbnail images on the internet that are intentionally engineered to be misleading. They deliberately withhold crucial context to create an information gap, forcing the user to click the link to satisfy their manufactured curiosity.
You will never believe what the mayor did next. The reason will shock you.
Yes, that kind of manipulative garbage. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because clickbait and sensationalism were just the superficial, visible symptoms of a much darker, much deeper systemic disease. The core architecture relies on a concept that is truly chilling: the weaponization of outrage. The weaponization of outrage requires deep analysis because it is not just an annoying internet quirk or a byproduct of bad journalism.
No.
It is a meticulously calculated, highly refined, massively profitable business model. The entire digital media landscape is built on the attention economy. Human attention is the raw material, and advertising revenue is the profit.
Okay, follow the money.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, over the last 2 decades, media networks and social media platforms have utilized A/B testing on billions of data points regarding human behavioral psychology. And their algorithms discovered a fundamental, unavoidable neurological truth about our species. Angry people click more links than happy people.
Wait, Let me just pause and repeat that, because the implications of that single sentence are so incredibly bleak. Angry people click more links than happy people.
It is a biological reality rooted in our evolutionary history. Contentment is a passive state. When you are happy, relaxed, and feeling safe, your brain downregulates.
You just chill out.
Right. You put your phone away, you go for a walk, you enjoy your life, you stop consuming. But anger is an active, aggressive, high-energy emotion. It triggers the amygdala. It initiates the fight-or-flight response, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline.
It's literally physical.
It is. Evolutionarily, this system was designed to keep us alive when a tiger jumped out of the bushes. It demands immediate action. It demands a response to neutralize the threat. Today, the tiger is a political headline.
Oh, wow.
If a platform shows you an article that makes you furious, something that violently violates your deeply held moral values, you are biologically, neurologically compelled to interact with it.
You can't look away.
You will click the article. You will scroll aggressively through the comments. You will type out a furious, adrenaline-fueled reply. You will share it to show your tribe how terrible the other side is. Every single one of those desperate actions keeps you on the platform longer.
And every single second you stay on that platform, angry, stressed, and engaged, they are serving you advertisements. They are literally harvesting your visceral neurochemical distress and converting it directly into corporate quarterly profits.
Exactly. The architecture of the platform financially incentivizes the total destruction of objective, calming reporting.
That's so depressing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about the economics. Why would a media company spend immense financial resources and months of investigative time to publish a nuanced, objective, calm report that will generate mild passive interest?
When they can just make people mad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do that when they can take a sensationalized, polarizing, entirely out-of-context fragment of a story, weaponize the outrage around it, and generate a massive, highly profitable algorithmic wildfire for free?
It's an arbitrage on human misery. If our anger is literally a product being harvested, packaged, and sold to advertisers, does that mean that actively avoiding sensationalism, like refusing to click the clickbait, refusing to engage in the comment section when we feel our blood pressure rising, is actually a profound form of economic boycott?
That is exactly what it is. It is an attention boycott. When you recognize the physical sensation of outrage building in your chest, and you consciously choose to refuse to surrender your cognitive focus to the machine, you are starving the algorithmic engine of its most valuable fuel.
You're starving the fire.
Yes, you are cutting off the profit margin of polarization. To fully recognize the weaponization of outrage is to realize that your own emotional state, your own neurochemistry, is being exploited by unseen corporate architectures.
It's like finding out the matrix is real and the entire power grid runs on human cortisol.
That's a grim but accurate way to look at it.
But this architectural reality, an entire global media ecosystem designed from the ground up to weaponize our emotions, it triggers a massive pre-existing flaw in human psychology. When the outrage business model collides with the biological flaws of the human brain, it leads us to our final, terrifying destination, the absolute summit of the tower, psychological traps, and the post-truth reality.
Because the media ecosystem doesn't just make us angry. The constant bombardment of weaponized emotion fundamentally alters our structural relationship with reality itself. And it achieves this by aggressively exploiting a deeply ingrained cognitive blind spot called confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. This is the heavy stuff.
It is.
We define confirmation bias as the deeply ingrained human tendency to actively search for, interpret, favor, and remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, while simultaneously ignoring, dismissing, or entirely forgetting facts that prove us wrong.
It is the brain's ultimate defense mechanism against the pain of cognitive dissonance. In evolutionary psychology, cognitive ease is the goal.
Right, we want to be comfortable.
Exactly. It is physically uncomfortable. It literally registers as pain in the brain to have your core worldview successfully challenged. It requires immense, exhausting mental energy to admit you were wrong, tear down your internal models, and restructure your understanding of reality from scratch.
No one wants to do that.
Nobody. So the brain takes the path of least resistance. It acts like a highly aggressive bouncer at an exclusive nightclub.
The bouncer analogy is perfect for this. Let's explore that. The exclusive nightclub is your ego, your core identity, your political and social worldview.
Right.
The bouncer standing at the velvet rope is your confirmation bias. The bouncer has a very strict VIP list. When pieces of information walk up to the club trying to get in, the bouncer looks at them. If the fact is dressed exactly like your pre-existing beliefs, if it confirms what you already think about the world, the bouncer unhooks the velvet rope and says, "Come on in, VIP access, head straight to the memory banks."
Easy entry.
But if a piece of objective, verifiable evidence walks up and it contradicts your worldview, the bouncer violently throws it out into the alley. The bouncer doesn't even let the fact in the door to be evaluated. It's rejected before it even registers in your conscious reasoning.
This raises an important question, though. How does this play out today? Because in the past, the physical world objective reality would eventually force the bouncer to let the truth in.
Like you couldn't just ignore a fire.
Exactly. If you believed fire didn't burn, the physical world would rapidly correct your confirmation bias. If your political views were too extreme, your local community would push back and provide friction.
Right. Your neighbors would say, "Hey, you're being crazy."
But today, the algorithms driving the outrage economy recognize exactly what is on your bouncer's VIP list. And instead of providing friction or correcting you, the algorithm coddles the bouncer.
Oh, man.
It says, "Oh, this user's bouncer only lets in outrage about topic X. And when we feed them information that confirms their bias about topic X, they stay on the platform for 4 hours and click 50 ads."
So they just keep feeding it.
Yes. So the media ecosystem begins to exclusively feed you articles, videos, and clickbait that validate your specific worldview while actively hiding any information that might challenge you.
It builds a custom-made reality tunnel. It uses sensationalism to constantly validate your distorted VIP list.
Which leads to the fragmentation of society. Because of confirmation bias fueled by algorithmic tailored outrage, we have retreated into bespoke, hyper-personalized echo chambers.
We don't even talk to each other anymore.
We literally do not share the same baseline reality with our physical neighbors anymore. We can look at the exact same event, a political speech, an economic report, or, to return to our foundation, a massive storm.
Right, the hurricane.
But one person's digital feed tells them it is a tragic natural disaster exacerbated by climate change, and their neighbor's feed tells them it is a fabricated hoax manufactured by their political enemies to steal funding.
And both people think they are 100% right.
Because both people have their confirmation bias stroked by their respective algorithms. Emotion, tribal identity, and algorithmic validation have completely overridden objective, verifiable facts.
So what does this all mean? That profound structural collapse of shared reality brings us to the ultimate definition of our deep dive, the current historical moment we are all trying to survive in, the post-truth era.
It is vital to understand that the post-truth era is not an era where truth has ceased to exist. Gravity still works.
Math is still real.
Exactly. It is an era where objective facts have simply become less influential in shaping public opinion and driving societal action than appeals to emotion and personal belief.
Truth just matters less.
Truth still exists out there in the dark, but it has lost its currency. It has been utterly devalued in the marketplace of ideas, replaced by the sheer volume, velocity, and profitability of weaponized outrage.
There is a quote from the material that distills this entire philosophical summit into one incredibly profound, deeply unsettling thought. I want to unpack this word by word. It says, "We are currently navigating the dark waters of the post-truth era. Driven by sensationalism and the weaponization of outrage, the media ecosystem exploits our confirmation bias. We are drowning in information, yet starving for objective truth."
Drowning in information, yet starving for objective truth. It is the central paradox that defines modern civilization.
It really is.
On a purely mechanical level, we have access to the entirety of recorded human knowledge in glowing rectangles in our pockets. The sheer volume of data is oceanic. We are literally drowning in the noise, the clickbait, the wildfire rumors, the continuous 24/7 need to sprint alongside the runaway train of news just to catch up.
The water is just completely over our heads.
Yes.
But the nutritional value of all that water is absolute zero. It's all empty calories engineered in a lab to spike our cortisol, trigger our outrage, and stroke our confirmation bias so we click another ad. So while our brains are completely overwhelmed and drowning in data, our intellect, our soul, is starving.
We are desperate for something real.
We are desperate for the quiet, unvarnished, high-friction, objective truth. But the architecture of the internet makes it incredibly difficult to find. The truth doesn't go viral because the truth is usually complex, nuanced, and frankly, a little boring.
And that is the true summit of the linguistic and media tower. We have moved from the simple physical act of watching a screen to recognizing the tragic reality that the screen is manipulating our neurochemistry to obscure the truth.
It is a monumental climb. Let's take a breath and recap the sheer scale of the journey we have taken today. We started on the ground floor, analyzing the basic physics of human perception. We learned that English demands we accurately watch the chaotic, kinetic parade of dynamic media and look at the quiet, self-paced, static exhibits of print.
Then we ascended to the investigative level. We recognize that in a fast-moving world, we cannot afford to be passive observers.
No, we have to be active.
We must actively look into suspicious claims, pierce the surface of the text, and catch up on necessary context to protect ourselves from bad actors who effortlessly make up fake news.
We armored our minds with the skeptic's toolkit. We learned to install that cognitive spam filter by taking unbelievable claims with a grain of salt. We mapped the destructive airborne physics of how rumors spread like wildfire, and we trained ourselves to listen to the silence between the notes so we can read between the lines of highly engineered corporate and political subtext.
And finally, we scaled the philosophical summit. We analyzed the macroeconomic architecture of our reality, recognizing how sensationalism and clickbait are merely symptoms of the corporate weaponization of outrage.
The engines of the matrix.
We saw exactly how these engines exploit the bouncer of our confirmation bias, locking us into customized echo chambers, leaving us stranded in a fragmented post-truth era.
Drowning in information, yet starving for objective truth. That concept is going to sit with me for a long time. But we don't want to just leave you drowning in those dark waters. There is a lifeline, a call to action for every single listener right now.
Homework time.
Yes, your explicit homework is to practice your media literacy today. Do not just let this deep dive be abstract philosophy that you listen to on your commute. Apply it to your actual life.
The active application is the only way to build the muscle. Go find a news article today. Do not just read the surface text and react. Try to actively read between the lines.
Ask the hard questions.
Ask yourself, is the author using objective language, or are you being targeted by sensationalism? Is the headline designed to genuinely inform you, or is it clickbait designed to trigger a specific emotional response? Pay attention to your own biology.
Yeah, check your pulse.
Are you feeling a sudden surge of anger? Is your heart rate elevating? If so, recognize that your outrage is potentially being harvested and weaponized.
Take back your agency. Refuse to be a product. Refuse to let them sell your anger. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we have discussed, but takes us one terrifying step further into the future.
Okay, lay it on us.
The landscape we have described today is already incredibly treacherous. And it was built entirely by human beings using relatively blunt instruments.
Human-coded algorithms.
Exactly. We just spent this entire deep dive analyzing how human-run media companies and human-coded algorithms have successfully weaponized our outrage using broad demographic data. They know what makes a certain age group or political affiliation angry.
They've mastered it.
They have already learned how to feed our confirmation bias for profit, creating a post-truth era where we are drowning in information. But here is the thought experiment that should keep you awake tonight. What happens when highly advanced generative artificial intelligence enters this ecosystem at an industrial scale?
Oh, that is a chilling thought.
What happens when AI learns to write perfectly personalized clickbait, not just targeting broad demographics, but tailored specifically to your unique individual psychological profile?
It's the ultimate weaponization of the echo chamber. Currently, algorithms recommend pre-existing content, but generative AI can create bespoke content from nothing.
Right. If an AI can analyze your entire digital footprint, every post you've ever yanked, every article you've ever lingered on, every comment you've ever written, it can find out exactly what terrifies you specifically. It knows what angers you uniquely.
It knows your bouncer's VIP list perfectly.
It knows exactly who is on the VIP list of your specific confirmation bias bouncer. What happens when that AI generates millions of articles, synthetic videos, and deepfake audio recordings completely made up from scratch, entirely indistinguishable from reality, designed specifically to exploit your exact neurochemical vulnerabilities?
It's not just a funhouse mirror anymore.
No, it's a completely synthetic reality tunnel built exclusively for an audience of one. In that customized synthetic future, will we even possess the cognitive tools to recognize what the truth looks like?
When the funhouse mirror is no longer just passively bending the light, but actively predicting exactly what you want to see and generating it before you even look. I mean, the very concept of objective shared reality might become entirely obsolete. We will be drowning in bespoke illusions.
And suddenly, that expectation of precision we talked about at the very beginning, that comforting, naive illusion that our eyes are just clean, high-definition cameras recording an unfiltered universe, it completely shatters.
It really does.
The diagnostic landscape of reality is entirely murky. Language, media, algorithms, and soon generative AI, they're all bending the light. The only defense you have left is your mind. Stay critical, keep building your tower, and we will see you on the next deep dive. So I want you to picture a scenario, and it's one that literally every single one of us has experienced.
Oh boy.
You're standing in an elevator.
Right.
The doors slide shut, and suddenly you are just trapped in this like 6x6 metal box with a neighbor or maybe a coworker from accounting or just a complete stranger.
And the silence is just...
It is aggressively deafening. Exactly. You're watching those little digital floor numbers slowly tick up, and you are desperately searching your brain for something, literally anything, to say to break that awkward tension.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. And what do you do? What is the one universal lifeline we all instinctively reach for in the English language?
Talk about the weather.
You talk about the weather, you look at them and say like, wow, it's really coming down out there, or beautiful day we're having, right?
Yeah, it's the ultimate social lubricant.
It really is. It is the most common, universally accepted form of small talk that exists. I mean, we do it at bus stops. We do it while waiting for the coffee machine in the break room. We do it in those weird transitional 2 minutes before a virtual meeting actually starts.
Oh, the Zoom small talk. Yeah.
The worst. But here's the thing that really struck me as I was looking through our source materials for today. There is this massive, almost, incomprehensible cognitive and linguistic chasm between looking out a window and saying, it's a nice day, and discussing the literal geological fate of the planet we are standing on.
Oh, it is a staggering leap, isn't it?
It's huge.
When we talk about the weather casually in an elevator, we are operating on the absolute surface of the language. Like I said, it's just a social lubricant. But when we start talking about the climate, the environment, resource depletion, and our collective impact on the globe, we are fundamentally asking the English language to do a completely different kind of heavy lifting. We're suddenly asking everyday words to carry the weight of complex environmental science, macroeconomic theory, and deep human psychology.
Exactly. And that gap, that linguistic scaling, that is our mission for this deep dive today.
I'm excited for this one.
Me too. We have an incredibly fascinating stack of linguistic and sociological research in front of us that essentially maps out how the English language approaches nature, the environment, and the climate.
Right.
And we are going to guide you through this vocabulary landscape, but we aren't just looking at definitions. The research we are digging into today demonstrates how the words we use actually scale up precisely as the complexity of the problems we face scales up.
And just to set the expectations right out of the gate for you listening, this is not a grammar lesson.
No, definitely not.
We are not here to read you a textbook glossary. What we're exploring is the architecture of human thought. The linguistics papers we were reviewing today trace a very deliberate progression.
A really fascinating one.
Yeah, they start out at what linguists call the A2 foundation level, which is the simple, immediate mechanics of describing the weather right in front of your face.
Right, the elevator talk.
Exactly. Then the analysis moves up through the B1 level, looking at physical action verbs and how our language frames our physical interaction with our environment. From there, we scale up to the B2 level.
The metaphors.
Yes, the cognitive metaphors and idioms we rely on when problems become just, too large for the human brain to process literally.
Yeah.
And finally, we are going to summit at the C1 and C2 master levels. This is the philosophical peak where language completely shifts gears. At that level, words aren't used to describe rain or snow anymore. They're used to diagnose the human condition itself in the face of existential global changes.
I am so ready to pull this apart because honestly, by the time we finish this deep dive, I guarantee you will never look at a cloudy sky or, one of those heavily produced corporate sustainability commercials the same way again.
Absolutely not. You'll see right through them.
You are going to have the exact linguistic framework to decode what is actually happening beneath the surface. So let's just jump right into the basement of this linguistic architecture, the foundational mechanics.
Let's do it.
When we look at how language structures our perception of the environment, the research points out that humans rely on an incredibly binary, almost rigid system to describe immediate weather.
They do. And it's rooted in how our brains historically needed to process environmental data quickly. When you look at the fundamental building blocks of weather description, you see a sharp distinction between identifying an object, which is a noun, and assessing an environmental state, an adjective.
Right.
It seems rudimentary, but the cognitive shift is profound. Take the sun, for example. The word sun is a noun. It identifies a celestial body, a burning sphere of gas.
But when you are in that elevator, you don't say, "It is sun today."
Exactly. The linguistic papers emphasize this as a critical cognitive boundary. You aren't pointing out the existence of the object. You are assessing how that object alters your immediate reality.
Right, which brings in the famous why rule that linguists talk about at this foundation level. You add a y to the noun to create the descriptive state. So sun becomes sunny.
Wind becomes windy.
Cloud becomes cloudy. But what I find fascinating here isn't just the spelling rule. It's like why human language evolved to do this. It's an evolutionary shorthand, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, our ancestors didn't need a complex philosophical breakdown of meteorology to know if they should go hunting. They just needed a fast binary descriptor. Sunny, windy, cloudy.
Right, they just needed to know if they needed a coat.
Precisely. It is an immediate environmental assessment. The adjective form provides a rapid-fire context for human behavior. Sunny dictates one set of actions, cloudy dictates another. But what the research gets really interested in is where this simple, elegant system completely breaks down.
Oh yeah, the verb trap.
The verb trap. The Y rule works beautifully for static atmospheric conditions like sun and wind. But when we introduce active precipitation, rain and snow, the entire mechanical system shifts. They stop acting purely as descriptive states and start acting as verbs.
Right.
And the moment they become verbs, we are forced to introduce the concept of time.
Yes. This is where the cognitive science of language gets so intriguing to me, because suddenly you aren't just describing a static sky, you have to lock your description into a specific time frame.
Exactly.
The materials break this down into the collision between the present continuous tense and the present simple tense. And it reveals so much about how our brains prioritize information. Like if you look out the window and actively see water falling from the sky right at this second, the language demands the present continuous. You say, "It is raining."
Because the action is observable and immediate. It is raining. The trap that many language learners fall into, and frankly, a trap that reveals a lot about cognitive processing, is trying to use the present simple for that immediate reality. You don't look at falling water and say, "It rains."
No, you sound like a robot.
Right. Because "it rains" describes a chronic condition, a general climatic truth, not an immediate visual stimulus.
The researchers use this brilliant comparative example. They say, "It rains a lot in London, but right now it is sunny."
That's a great example.
It shows how our brains hold two entirely different concepts of the environment simultaneously. I was actually trying to come up with an analogy for this to really map how our brains are separating these two ideas.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay, so think of the present continuous, "it is raining," as a live video feed on your phone.
Okay.
You open a traffic cam app, you look at the feed, and you see exactly what the weather is doing second by second. That live feed is, "It is raining." It's urgent, it's right now. But the present simple, "it rains," is more like a printed postcard you buy in a souvenir shop. It's a static, overarching fact. The postcard says, "London, where it rains." It doesn't mean water is physically falling out of the cardboard postcard. It means that is the established identity of a location.
I like
So
it.
it's the live video feed versus the printed postcard.
I think that analogy perfectly captures the cognitive division. We are hardwired to react to the live video feed. The immediate threat or inconvenience of rain right now dictates our survival or, in modern terms, our daily schedule.
Right. Do I need my umbrella?
Exactly. The printed postcard, the long-term climate data, requires a much higher level of abstract thinking to process. And to illustrate how these two temporal concepts violently crash into each other in our daily lives, the research provides a very specific sociological scenario.
Oh, the ruined July picnic.
The ruined July picnic.
This is such a perfect distillation of human frustration. Let's unpack it. Imagine you and I have packed this elaborate lunch. We are standing by the door with a blanket, and I ask you what it looks like outside. You look through the blinds, you see the dark sky, and you give me the live video feed assessment. It is raining, water is currently falling.
And the immediate psychological response to that live feed is to contrast it against the long-term expectation. The natural response in the scenario is, but does it usually rain in July?
Yeah, this isn't supposed to happen.
Right. The speaker violently shifts from the present continuous to the present simple. They are grasping for the printed postcard. They are appealing to the general climatic truth of the season to somehow override the immediate reality.
Which is such a deeply human reaction. We want the general fact that July is usually hot and sunny to protect our plans. We feel almost, I don't know, betrayed by the environment when the live video feed doesn't match the postcard we were promised.
Betrayed is a good word for it.
So you have this linguistic collision that perfectly maps onto our disappointment. The general fact promises sun, but the present continuous reality is delivering rain, and suddenly we are eating potato salad on the living room rug.
It highlights a critical limitation in how we interact with the world at this foundational level. Describing a ruined picnic with accurate verb tenses is ultimately an act of passive observation.
Right.
We are standing inside a sheltered box, looking out through a pane of glass, and merely diagnosing what the sky is doing to us. It is a one-way relationship where the environment acts and we observe.
That is the exact friction point, passive observation, because as we all know, human beings are not passive observers of this planet.
Not at all.
We don't just sit behind the glass. We alter the landscape, we extract things from the ground, and we leave things behind. And the research makes it clear that to describe that two-way, highly destructive relationship, our language has to evolve.
The foundation level just isn't enough.
Right. The A2 foundation collapses because it doesn't account for our hands. To describe what we do to the earth, we have to move into the B1 vocabulary. We have to introduce action and consequence.
Which brings us to the realm of phrasal verbs. The linguistic analysis at this B1 level focuses intensely on how phrasal verbs operate as mechanical, almost physical extensions of human activity.
So break down what a phrasal verb is for us, just quickly.
Sure. A phrasal verb combines a base verb with a spatial preposition or an adverb, words like away, up, out, to create an entirely new, highly specific action. And when we look at the core phrasal verbs used to describe our environmental impact, they paint a very stark picture of resource manipulation.
Let's pull these apart, because the spatial prepositions are doing so much psychological work here. The researchers highlight 4 critical phrases, starting with the most common action in modern consumer society. When you finish a bottle of water and you toss the plastic container into a bin, the phrase we use is throw away. You are physically discarding an object.
Throw away is the genesis of the cycle, and the inevitable consequence of millions of people throwing things away improperly leads to the second phrasal verb. When a physical space, a beach, a local park, a riverbank, becomes overwhelmed by discarded material, it necessitates a communal effort to clean up. Clean up? Right. The preposition up here is fascinating. It implies a restoration of order, lifting the debris from the ground to return the space to a baseline state of cleanliness.
So we have the mechanical discarding, throw away, and the mechanical restoration, cleanup. But the analysis then shifts focus from our waste to our fuel. It looks at how we talk about the raw materials of the earth itself. The third crucial phrasal verb describes the mathematics of depletion.
Yes.
When a society consumes a finite resource like fresh water or lumber or fossil fuels until the absolute last drop is gone, we say we run out of it.
Run out of is a spatial metaphor for an empty container. The implication is movement, running until a boundary is hit, the out. It signifies a total cessation of supply.
Yeah.
You can't run out of sunshine in a permanent sense, but you can absolutely run out of oil. It introduces the concept of finality to our physical actions.
And that concept of finality leads us to the darkest, most irreversible phrase in the B1 taxonomy.
It does.
If we run out of a habitat, or if an environment becomes too toxic from what we've thrown away, the biological consequence is absolute. When an entire species of animal stops breathing, when the very last one is gone forever, the English language uses the phrase, die out.
It is a gradual fading into non-existence. The researchers provide a comprehensive narrative example to show how these 4 physical verbs interlock to describe modern environmental tragedy. They map it onto a typical ocean conservation documentary.
It's a brutal cycle when you string them together. Let's trace the narrative from the paper. The cycle always initiates with human consumption and waste. The documentary opens by quantifying the millions of tons of plastic that human beings throw away into the ocean every single year. The action is continuous and massive.
And you can almost picture the slow motion footage of the garbage in the water.
Oh, absolutely.
The narrative then naturally pivots to the human response. It highlights the local communities, the divers, and the volunteers who are desperately attempting to clean up the suffocating coral reefs. They are engaged in a physical, localized battle against a global tide of waste.
But the narrative has to introduce a ticking clock to create urgency. The scientists in the documentary step in and provide the mathematical reality. They warn that humanity is going to run out of time. The rate at which we throw away is mathematically outpacing our capacity to clean up. The container of opportunity is emptying.
And the documentary concludes with the ultimate biological consequence. If we run out of time, the biodiversity of the ocean collapses, and thousands of marine species will permanently die out. It is a perfectly constructed sequence of B1 logic: action, reaction, limitation, and extinction.
You know, as we dissect these specific words, I find myself getting really hung up on the psychology of that very first phrase, throw away.
Yeah.
The researchers touch on this, and it honestly blew my mind a little bit. When you really think about the physics of our planet, the phrase throw away is a complete linguistic hallucination.
Linguistic hallucination. I think I see where you're going, but flesh that out for me.
Okay, so think about the concept of object permanence, right? Babies learn that just because you hide a toy under a blanket, it doesn't mean the toy ceased to exist.
Right.
Yet, as adults, we seem to totally forget this when it comes to trash. We use the word away as if it is a magical, invisible portal located at the bottom of our garbage cans. When you drop a plastic bottle into a bin, it vanishes from your immediate sensory reality. You don't see it, you don't smell it. So your brain creates a cognitive shortcut and says, it is away.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. But physically, geographically, there is no place on Earth called away. The matter still exists. We aren't throwing the bottle away. We are just relocating it.
Relocating it.
We're paying a truck to relocate it from our kitchen to a landfill outside of town, or it is being relocated by currents into the ocean, exactly like the documentary narrative pointed out. Away is a comforting lie baked right into the English language. It's a linguistic defense mechanism that allows us to consume endlessly without having to carry the psychological burden of where the physical object actually goes.
That is a profound and highly accurate critique of the vocabulary. And it speaks directly to the concept of linguistic determinism. The idea that the words we use actually shape and constrain how we are capable of thinking about a problem.
Yes.
If our language tells us we can throw things away, we act with a carelessness that we wouldn't have if the phrase was relocate to the ocean. The B1 vocabulary is incredibly useful for describing the literal mechanics of our hands. I hold a bottle, I throw it, it leaves my hand. That is true for the individual in that micro moment.
But that's exactly where the linguistic determinism traps us. Those literal verbs completely fail when we try to scale the problem up. If I say, I throw away a cup, my brain can process that.
Yeah.
But how does the human brain process the reality of 3 billion people relocating 100 million tons of synthetic polymers into a global water system over 50 years?
It can't.
Literal mechanical verbs cannot hold that amount of data. The numbers just become abstract noise.
They do. The human brain did not evolve to conceptualize global, multi-generational data sets. We evolved to understand what is happening in our immediate tribe and our immediate valley. So when the crisis scales up to a planetary level, literal terminology breaks down. The words literally become too small for the problem.
Wow.
And this is exactly where the research indicates we have to shift gears again. To comprehend a crisis of this magnitude, language abandons the literal and embraces the metaphorical.
Enter the B2 analyst level. This is where we stop talking about our hands and start talking about our minds. What I found so striking in the research here is how we solve this cognitive overload. When the data is too massive, we rely on idioms.
Yeah, idioms.
And ironically, the English language raids the natural world itself to find the most powerful idioms for describing massive human-made complexities.
Idioms are essential cognitive tools. At the B2 level, they act as a vital bridge. They take an abstract, highly complex, almost invisible systemic problem, and they map it onto a concrete physical image that the brain can instantly visualize and process.
I kept thinking of these B2 idioms as mental zip files.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. If you have an incredibly dense, gigabyte-sized folder of data, say 50 years of climate change statistics, ocean acidification rates, and global supply chain inefficiencies, You cannot explain all of those data points in a casual conversation. It would take hours.
People would tune out immediately.
Exactly. So language allows you to compress all of that terrifying, heavy data into a single, instantly recognizable visual image. You send that tiny linguistic zip file to the listener, their brain unzips it, and they instantly, viscerally understand the scale and the dread of what you're talking about.
Let's examine the zip files the research highlights. The first one is designed to articulate the profound sense of futility we often feel when facing planetary issues. The idiom is a drop in the ocean.
A drop in the ocean.
We use this to describe a tiny localized effort that is ultimately insignificant when measured against a massive problem.
The example they use is something we've all probably felt. Someone says, I spent all week separating my recycling, but honestly, against the scale of global corporate pollution, it feels like a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, it's a very common feeling.
The visual compression there is brilliant. You are asking the listener to imagine standing on a cliff, looking at the dark, vast, infinite expanse of the Pacific Ocean, and you are holding a tiny glass eyedropper, and you squeeze out one single drop of water into the crashing waves. It perfectly encapsulates the despair of the micro versus the macro.
Notice how the idiom relies on the sheer, terrifying vastness of nature to provide the scale. The ocean is our ultimate reference point for infinity. Now, the research moves to a second idiom, one that doesn't just deal with scale, but with the cognitive dread of hidden information.
Right.
How do we communicate the sudden realization that a problem we've discovered is actually just a tiny fraction of a much larger invisible disaster?
We use the zip file, the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. This metaphor is rooted in physical reality. Due to the density of ice relative to seawater, roughly 90% of an iceberg's mass is submerged and invisible beneath the surface. We only see the 10% that breaks the water.
So the bulk of it is just lurking down there.
Yes. So when we describe an issue as the tip of the iceberg, we are communicating a specific type of warning. The danger isn't what you can see. The danger is what you can't see.
The linguistics paper applies this to the plastic pollution crisis in a way that genuinely gave me chills. They wrote, the visible plastic bottles washing up on the beach are just the tip of the iceberg. The true crisis is the microplastics currently circulating in the global water supply.
It's a stark image.
It perfectly captures the horror of the situation. We can look at a beach and use our be1 verb to clean up the bottles. That's the 10% we can fight. But the idiom forces us to acknowledge the invisible submerged 90%, the microscopic plastic dust that is already in the rain, in the soil, and in our bodies. The idiom does the heavy lifting of making an invisible threat feel massive and solid.
And that feeling of impending disaster naturally leads to the third idiom the researchers highlight. Once we recognize the iceberg, we have to figure out how to survive it. When a society, a business, or an individual goes through a period of severe, chaotic hardship and manages to survive without being completely destroyed, we use a very specific meteorological metaphor.
We say they managed to weather the storm.
Weather the storm. The text provides a classic macroeconomic example. The global financial economy is in a terrible recession right now, but our company has enough capital to weather the storm.
Okay, I have to stop here because as I was reading this section, a massive, glowing paradox jumped out at me. It's an irony so deep, it almost feels like a joke the English language is playing on us.
I think I know what you're pointing at, but lay it out. What's the paradox?
Look the raw materials of the vocabulary we are just using. We are taking the most vast, uncontrollable, and historically destructive forces of the natural world. A boundless, drowning ocean, a massive ship-sinking iceberg, a violent, chaotic storm. We take these terrifying elements of nature, and we repurpose them as the exact vocabulary we need to describe our human-made crises. We talk about a purely human invention, a corporate financial market crashing due to greed, and we describe surviving it as weathering the storm.
It is a phenomenal irony. We're extracting our linguistic frameworks from the natural world to articulate the failures of the artificial systems we build to insulate ourselves from that very natural world. Nature is literally supplying us with the vocabulary to describe the economic and ecological damage we are inflicting upon it.
It's like nature is holding up a mirror to our own chaos. We are the ones causing the problem, but we have to pretend it's a storm so our brains can process the danger.
That's very true.
These mental zip files are incredibly elegant, but I also see a severe limitation to them, which the research points out as we move toward the final section.
Yes, the limitation of the B2 idiom is that it is fundamentally descriptive, not diagnostic.
Oh, that's an important distinction.
Saying the microplastic issue is the tip of the iceberg perfectly illustrates that the problem is huge and hidden, but it doesn't tell me why the iceberg is there. It doesn't explain the economic incentives that created the plastic. It doesn't name the entities responsible for it. And it doesn't analyze the psychological toll that living with these invisible icebergs takes on a population.
Right. We have successfully communicated the scale of the symptoms, but we haven't diagnosed the disease. If I go to a doctor, I don't just want them to say, wow, that tumor is the tip of the iceberg. I want them to tell me the pathology of it.
Precisely. To get the pathology, to move from awestruck observation to systemic diagnosis, language has to shed the metaphors and become surgically precise. We have to leave the B2 analyst behind and ascend to the highest tier of the linguistic framework.
Welcome to the summit, the C1C2 philosopher. This is the absolute climax of our deep dive.
The air gets a bit thinner up here.
It really does. The research stack presents this final level as the masterclass terminology used by sociologists, economists, and geologists to analyze what they consider the greatest existential crisis in human history. At this altitude, we are completely done talking about rain, or physical trash, or even metaphorical icebergs. We are now talking about the invisible systems, the economic architecture, and the psychological realities that govern our world.
At this highly proficient level, the vocabulary becomes intensely interdisciplinary. It pulls from marketing, game theory, psychology, and earth sciences to create a diagnostic toolkit.
It's pulling from everywhere.
It has to explain the complexity. Let's start with the first C1 term the researchers unpack, which deals with the corporate world's attempt to manipulate our perception of the crisis. That term is greenwashing.
Greenwashing. If there is one word you need to navigate modern consumer capitalism, it is this one. The linguistic breakdown is fascinating. It's a portmanteau, a combination of two distinct concepts. You have green, which has been universally adopted to mean eco-friendly, natural, or sustainable. And you combine it with whitewashing, an older term meaning to cover up a vice, a crime, or a structural flaw with a superficial layer of paint. Put them together, and greenwashing becomes the ultimate deceptive corporate practice.
It is a term that defines the weaponization of language and imagery. The researchers provide a very rigid definition. Greenwashing occurs specifically when a corporation allocates more financial resources toward marketing themselves as environmentally conscious than they actually spend on altering their operations to reduce their ecological impact.
So it's all PR.
It is a calculated diversion of resources into optics rather than mechanics.
And it is terrifyingly effective because it preys on our desire to do good. The case study they highlight is so ubiquitous, I guarantee everyone listening has encountered it recently. They describe a massive fast fashion conglomerate, a company known for exploiting cheap labor, using toxic dyes, and churning out millions of tons of synthetic clothing that ends up in landfills.
We all know the type of company.
Right. And suddenly, they launch a conscious collection. They put up billboards featuring models standing in pristine forests, wearing a single t-shirt made from 5% recycled organic cotton. The signage is earthy brown and green.
And to the untrained eye, the A2 or B1 speaker, it looks like progress. It looks like the company is cleaning up.
Exactly. But a C1 proficient speaker looks at that same billboard and has the vocabulary to immediately diagnose the illusion. They can point to it and say, that entire advertising campaign is pure greenwashing.
They can name the tactic.
Yes, it is a psychological placebo. The company gives the consumer a tiny hit of dopamine, the feeling of making an ethical choice by buying the organic shirt, so the consumer will completely ignore the massive destructive machinery operating behind the curtain. It's sleight of hand.
And it forces us to ask a much deeper question. Why is greenwashing the default corporate strategy? Why is it more logical for a company to spend millions on deceptive marketing rather than just fixing the environmental damage they cause?
Which seems insane.
It does. But to answer that, the research points us toward one of the most profound and depressing macroeconomic theories ever articulated. This brings us to the second master-level concept, the tragedy of the commons.
The tragedy of the commons. It sounds like the title of a bleak 19th century novel, but it is actually the mathematical engine of our environmental crisis. If you can understand this concept, you will instantly understand why global climate treaties fail and why pollution is so hard to stop. It fundamentally shifts how you view human behavior.
The theory, originally popularized in an economic context, describes a specific catastrophic failure of shared systems. The foundational concept is the commons, a shared, unregulated resource that no single entity owns, but everyone has open access to.
Like a public park.
Historically, as the name suggests, this referred to a communal pasture where any villager could let their sheep graze. But in the modern globalized context, the commons is the ozone layer, the international waters of the ocean, or the atmosphere itself.
Right, it's the stuff we all have to share to survive. And the tragedy occurs because of a flaw in rational human self-interest. The theory states that individuals, or in our case, massive multinational corporations, will act entirely rationally to maximize their own immediate profit.
That's just business.
Right. But because everyone is independently acting in their own self-interest, they collectively exhaust, degrade, and ultimately destroy the shared resource for absolutely everyone.
The researchers provide a stark, highly mechanical example to illustrate how this game theory plays out in real life. Imagine a lucrative manufacturing factory situated on the banks of a massive public river.
Okay, picture the factory.
The factory's operations produce a significant amount of toxic chemical waste. The executives face a choice in the boardroom. They can spend millions of dollars building a state-of-the-art filtration plant to safely neutralize the waste, or they can simply dump the raw chemicals directly into the river at zero cost.
Now, if we view this strictly through the lens of corporate capitalism and rational self-interest, dumping the chemicals is the mathematically correct business decision. By using the river as a free garbage can, they maximize their profit margins, they outcompete their rivals, and they satisfy their shareholders. For that specific factory, the action makes total sense.
It is entirely logical in the short term. However, the tragedy manifests when you zoom out. By dumping the toxins, they contaminate the water supply for the fishing village miles downstream, destroying that local economy. They kill the biodiversity of the delta.
Which is devastating.
And eventually, if every factory on the river makes that same logical choice, the river becomes a toxic sludge that can't even be used for the factory's own cooling systems. The shared resource is annihilated.
Wow.
That is the tragedy of the commons. It is the systemic mathematical mechanism behind why we deplete resources. It proves that without overarching regulation or a fundamental shift in values, rational actors will logically destroy their own habitat.
It is incredibly heavy to process that. To realize that the destruction of the planet isn't necessarily happening because of, cartoonish evil villains, but because of cold, rational economic math.
Just spreadsheets, really?
Yeah, spreadsheets. And sitting with that realization, living day after day, knowing that the commons is being actively destroyed while corporations greenwash the damage takes a severe neurological toll on a population. And that brings us to the third concept. The researchers identify a very specific psychological condition that is emerging as a direct result of this awareness. The term is eco-anxiety.
Eco-anxiety is a fascinating addition to the diagnostic vocabulary because it represents the internalization of environmental collapse. Psychologists and linguists define it not merely as a passing worry about bad weather, but as a chronic, severe, and debilitating fear of environmental doom. It is an ambient existential dread.
The papers specifically highlight how disproportionately this affects younger generations, and when you map it against the previous terms, it makes complete sense. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You are born into a world where you have access to the live video feed of global data. You can watch the polar ice caps melting in real time.
It's all right there on your phone.
You understand the math of the tragedy of the commons, meaning you know the systems are designed to fail. Yet every time you open an app, you are bombarded by corporate greenwashing telling you everything is fine if you just buy a paper straw.
Which is maddening.
It is. You possess the terrifying knowledge of the B2 iceberg, but you possess absolutely zero political or economic power to turn the ship. That resulting friction, the sheer paralyzing powerlessness while watching a slow-motion global disaster, that is the very definition of eco-anxiety.
It is the psychological tax we pay for living in a degrading environment. We have developed the vocabulary to perfectly diagnose our own mental suffering. But to fully grasp the scale of why we have eco-anxiety and the true scope of what the tragedy of the commons has achieved, we must look at the final, ultimate C2 term from our research stack. Here we go. This is a word that doesn't just diagnose a system or a feeling. It reclassifies the entire history of the Earth. We have to talk about the Anthropocene.
The Anthropocene. This is it. This is the absolute peak of the vocabulary mountain we have been climbing. This is a C2 level geological classification, and it shifts the paradigm of human existence. The researchers break down the etymology. Anthro comes from the ancient Greek word for human, and scene refers to a new geological epoch. So the Anthropocene literally translates to the human epoch.
To understand the weight of this word, you have to think like a geologist. For billions of years, the Earth's epochs were defined by massive planetary-scale forces. Meteor strikes that blotted out the sun, the shifting of tectonic plates, massive volcanic eruptions, and cyclical ice ages.
The big stuff.
Those were the forces that shaped the crust of the Earth and determined what lived or died. The assertion of the Anthropocene is that human activity has now superseded all of those natural forces.
It is a staggering, almost hubristic concept. The researchers phrase it brilliantly. We are no longer just an opportunistic species living on the surface of the Earth. We are now the primary biological and chemical force actively shaping it. We are the ones physically decapitating mountains for coal. We are the ones altering the pH balance of the entire ocean. We are the ones changing the thermal dynamics of the atmosphere.
And the physical evidence of our epoch will be written into the fossil record. Millions of years from now, a geologist won't find a layer of volcanic ash marking our era. They will find a distinct sedimentary layer of microplastics, radioactive isotopes from atomic testing, and the compressed bones of domesticated factory farm chickens. That is the geological signature of the Anthropocene.
You know, as you lay out that geological timeline, tracing this whole journey from the beginning, I just had this massive structural aha moment about the language itself.
Okay.
Think about the narrative arc we just walked through. Back in the B2 section, we spent a lot of time analyzing the idiom weathering the storm. We pictured humanity as this fragile entity, huddled together in a small boat, desperately trying to survive the wild, ancient, uncontrollable forces of nature. We viewed nature as the aggressor, the storm, and ourselves as the victims fighting to survive it.
Yes, that is the traditional historical framing of the human versus nature dynamic. It's the survivalist mindset.
But then you hit the C2 level, you define the Anthropocene, and you look at the tragedy of the commons, and the ultimate terrifying irony of our language reveals itself. We aren't the ones in the tiny boat trying to weather the storm anymore.
No, we're not.
In the Anthropocene, humanity is the storm. We are the uncontrollable, destructive force of nature wreaking havoc on the ecosystem. Through our industry and our scale, we went from merely trying to survive the weather to literally mechanically becoming the weather.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of the vocabulary. It is the ultimate cognitive flip.
Yeah.
And one of the lead sociologists in the source material provides a similarly grand synthesis of all these C1 and C2 terms into a single masterful thesis statement. I want to read it exactly as it is constructed in the paper because it demonstrates the pure diagnostic power and the density of this high-level language when it fires on all cylinders.
Please, let's hear the final diagnosis.
The thesis is constructed like this. As we attempt to navigate the new geological realities of the Anthropocene, modern populations are suffering from a chronic, collective eco-anxiety. The relentless greenwashing campaigns orchestrated by major corporations entirely fail to address the underlying macroeconomic tragedy of the commons, leaving the global citizen feeling politically and psychologically paralyzed in the face of an existential climate crisis.
Wow. When you hear all of those concepts interlocked like that, it's incredibly heavy.
But look at what that sentence accomplishes. When you string those specific words together, you realize they are doing so much more than just describing the physical world. They are diagnosing the exact sociological, economic, and psychological condition of humanity in the 21st century.
Right.
Those words articulate precisely why we feel the dread we feel, and how the invisible systems around us are failing us.
It is genuinely breathtaking to see language operate at that level of precision. We have taken such an incredible, expansive journey today. I want to take a moment to bring us all back down to earth and recap the sheer distance we've covered because we mapped an entire cognitive landscape.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started this deep dive in an elevator, basically just looking out a window. We were at the foundational level, examining the cognitive difference between spotting a noun and experiencing an adjective, unpacking why our brains prioritize the live video feed of a rainy day over the printed postcard of a long-term climate.
And from that passive observation, we move to the physical mechanics of our actions. We analyze the linguistic determinism of our phrasal verbs, exposing the comforting psychological illusion of throwing things away and mapping the brutal trajectory of running out of resources until species die out.
Then, when the literal data became too massive for our brains to hold, we scaled up to the realm of metaphors. We utilized the mental zip files of idioms. We used drops in the ocean and the hidden danger of icebergs to successfully compress the massive, terrifying scale of the crisis into images we could actually communicate to each other.
Until finally we reached the philosophical summit. We abandoned metaphors to use the master-level diagnostic vocabulary. We learned to spot the deceptive placebo of greenwashing. We unlocked the grim economic game theory of the tragedy of the commons. We named the psychological toll of our eco-anxiety. And we accepted our staggering new reality as the dominant geological force in the Anthropocene.
It really is a complete multidimensional map of how human beings process their reality. And now that you, the person listening right now, have this map fully downloaded into your brain, I want to issue you a challenge.
A challenge for the listener. I like it.
I want you to look around your own life, your own city, your own media diet today with these words echoing in your head. When you are scrolling through social media or walking through a grocery store, can you actively spot the examples of greenwashing on the packaging?
They're everywhere once you know to look.
Exactly. When you look at local politics or how traffic and public parks are managed in your town, do you recognize the tragedy of the commons playing out in real time? You have the vocabulary now. You have the exact linguistic tools required to decode the noise and see the systems for what they are.
It is deeply empowering to possess the right words. It gives you cognitive agency. But it also raises a vital, almost haunting question, and this is the thought I want to leave everyone with as we wrap up.
The thought.
We have just spent an hour exhaustively exploring how the English language has evolved and adapted to successfully name all of our modern existential dreads, our systemic failures, and our global crises. We have the vocabulary of the problem perfectly mapped out. We can clearly name the Anthropocene. We can clinically diagnose eco-anxiety.
Right, we've built a beautiful, intricate dictionary for the disaster.
Exactly. But if human language always evolves to meet the boundaries of our reality, it begs the question, what words haven't been invented yet?
Oh, wow.
If greenwashing and the tragedy of the commons represent the highly proficient vocabulary of the problem, what will the next generation's vocabulary of the solution look like? What are the new verbs, the new idioms, and the new economic definitions we will need to invent from scratch to describe a system that actually heals the commons instead of destroying it?
That is a phenomenal question. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests we can't build a reality we don't have the words for. So, what is the vocabulary of the cure? Next time you are standing in an elevator staring at those digital floor numbers ticking up, and you turn to the stranger next to you to make small talk about the weather, maybe think about that instead.
Give them something real to chew on.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, for wrestling with the cognitive science, and for weathering the storm of this complex information with us today. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep learning.